again, we are talking with Chris from DroneBusiness.center, the author of Dronin On. It's a great blog. Be sure to check it out. He puts it out weekly. Now, Chris, I guess we could just start with what are your thoughts about the whole situation about HR 302?
Well, I mean, you know, as I wrote in the newsletter, this is the roadmap that the industry's been screaming for. So, and I listened to Ryan's interview with you the other day, and, you know, I totally agree with him. It's a remarkably comprehensive effort. And I thought it might be useful to explain to our listeners exactly what this is and why it's important. And to understand that, you need to understand the difference between legislation, which is law, and regulation, which is rules. And the Congress creates legislation. They're the people who create laws. And so HR 302 is a result of a very long process that began in the House of Representatives, and then went to the Senate, and then was sort of an agreement between the two different sides, was points of view, was hammered out in conference, and HR 302 is the result of that. And that bill was approved, voted by overwhelming, the final bill was approved by both chambers and sent to the President for signature. So what that means is that now these laws, for example 336, which I'm sure we'll get to, enable the FAA to make regulations and to start the rulemaking process. It also, if you think about it, I never thought I'd get into drones to teach civics, but if you think about it, you know, this is the Congress manages the FAA, and we got a big share, but let's keep in mind that the FAA is $17 billion a year business with 49,000 employees. So there's a lot else in the bill. It tells the FAA what they have to do, how they want to do it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of this happens overnight or that everything gets attended to. You can look back to 2012 and see that there's still open issues. You can look back to the extension of 2016 and see there's still open issues. But it's kind of, think of this as marching orders to the FAA, and think of this, I think, beyond the word comprehensive, think of this as a continuation of the 2012 reauthorization, in which the FAA was instructed to the FAA was asked. And so that's what this is. This is the next step in a very specific one about how that integration is to be done.
Do you think it's a significant step for the industry as far as how the government is kind of really molding the industry pathway through regulation?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I can't think of any more significant. You know, this is what's going to happen. in various shapes, ways, and forms. I mean, you know, it's a remarkably forward-looking document. It reflects an awful lot of input from some smart people somewhere. I'm assuming the FAA had a big hand in it. And the way I kind of look at it is, okay, so in 2012 they said integrate the NAS, and everybody kind of fumbled around, and then they tried 333, and then they tried the registration, and then they came to Part 107, which kind of worked, and really started things going. And as a result of this past 6 years of experience, of all the conferences, of all the work that companies like, you know, K2 do, people have a much better understanding today of what's going to really take to integrate UAS into the national airspace. And I think this bill reflects that as best we can see. I think 5 years from now, when it comes up for renewal again, you can expect it to advance further. But it to move forward, and it gave some priorities, and I think it very clearly reflects the fact that the focus, the government, the Congress is excited about the potential of drones in public safety. They're excited about the economic potential of it, and their focus is on bringing those things forward. And so I as I said, can't imagine anything more significant.
So going back to you touched on it a little bit, the 336. Does this clean up the hobbyist situation?
Well, I think, it depends who you ask, I suppose.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So let's look at my view of what happened, and I think Ryan did a good job with it, by the way. I don't think it cleans it up completely, but let's look at why it happened and what had to happen. In January of 2017, the FAA proposed a rule for flight over people, and it went that when the FAA makes a rule, there's two parts to it. First, they have to send it to OIRA, which is the Office of, I don't remember what, but it's part of the Office of Management and Budget within the White House, and their job is to look at the rule and the economic impact. And it's a chance for, and before the public comment, public people can get involved in the OIRA process. It's a chance for other government, federal agencies to comment. And basically, when this thing hit OIRA, what I call the security agencies, loosely speaking, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and Department of Homeland Security, said, no, we're not going to have people flying around over other people until we know who they are, right? So this kind of, and if you look back at the extension of 2016, you will see that the first thing that the Congress tasked the FAA with, which they had not yet acted on, was remote identification. So the problem was that what happened in 2012 with 336 is that the modelers got what's called a carve-out or an exclusion, and it basically said the FAA cannot regulate them. And that went to a court case with Taylor, and the judge threw it out, Taylor versus Huerta, and it said the FAA has no right to regulate modelers. It says so very clearly here. So the problem was that how is the FAA going to mandate ideally universal remote ID, but any form of remote ID, when the vast majority of drones out there are quote-unquote hobbyist or modeler? Now, I mean, let's look at the numbers, right? So we think there's maybe 1.2 million roughly registered drones right now, right? Well, less than 200,000 of those are commercial units. Everything else is modeler or hobbyist. Now, what happened was that everybody went and hid behind the 336, behind the AMA skirts effectively. The AMA did not enforce registration. And most people never joined the AMA. They never paid the $75. So you've got the vast percentage of drones out there, which, what I say sometimes is you can't tell what it is once it's up there, right? The vast percentage of drones up there were unregistered and unregulated, and the court had said the FAA couldn't regulate them. So the whole real deal with 336 was not to pick on the AMA particularly, or the modelers who, for the most part have minded their own business flying around for the last 60 or 70 years under something called Section 97. It was to clear the way for the FAA to make a rule that enabled remote ID so that all these things that everybody wants, the expanded operations, flight over people, BV loss, all these things can become rules. Because without remote ID, the security agencies just said, no, none of that's going to happen. You're not going to do it. And basically the industry has been at a standstill for the past 2 years while this gets sorted out. So that's kind of the important piece of it. And unfortunately, and it kind of reveals the bias, if you will, towards enabling and furthering commercial operations. The recreational business is great fun for the individual person, but it only contributes to the economics of the Chinese exporters who build the things and the Best Buys and Amazons who sell them, and it really doesn't contribute much to the economy beyond that. And I think that it became very clear that the other thing that happened, obviously, and you guys work with first responders and with LE, who I assume are listening, is that from the sandy places in the Middle East, it became very apparent that these things made handy-dandy little weapons. And it's so apparent that it really greatly influenced U.S. military doctrine. And they're all scrambling like mad to figure out how to defend against it. Well, this is not lost on the Department of Homeland Security, who imagines somebody flying their drone into, the Rose Bowl with 95,000 fans cheering on USC, UCLA. So the awareness of the weaponization of drones, if you will, continued to increase in parallel, and that's how you ended up with now the DHS, DOJ right to test that everybody has made into a big deal about. They can shoot your drone down. That's really sort of not the point. But so all these things, and again, Ken, if you go back to what I said, all these things have evolved since 2012. And we're beginning to understand the potential. We're beginning to understand the problems. We're beginning to understand what's needed for the industry to move forward. And so that's what 302 kind of sums up our experience to date.
And once again, we are talking with Chris from DroneBusiness.center, the author of Dronin On. It's a great blog. Be sure to check it out. Now, Chris, is it bi-monthly? You Weekly. He pumps them out, and it's a great source of information. I read them all. I even read them twice before I did this interview with him once again. And me and Chris have had, Chris has had the unfortunate situation of actually meeting me in person as well, and hasn't gotten rid of me since.
Oh, it's fun. It's good. I love what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thanks.
See the success, and made in the USA drone is a fine thing.
It is, and then also too, we've partnered with a couple other companies, robotics guys. They provide maintenance nationwide, maintenance and repair, and so we're really starting to think about the customer service end of drones as well, because we know that's kind of a big situation working with some of the other larger drone companies out there.
Well, if it flies, it needs maintenance. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and that was interesting that what came out in 302 was they actually finally gave us some safety standards. Like for us, for OEMs, it was nice to get some sort of structure that they finally provided for us, because we were just kind of out there. We're making it. I mean, we don't fall under civil aircraft requirements because we're under the 55-pound mark. But it looks like this is all going to change now.
Yeah, I think that's, the people that I talk to who have been in the FAA or around the FAA or talk that talk and live in that world, which is to say the traditional aviation people basically are all saying and expect that, as the expanded operations become more complex, the standards and licenses will also become more complex. And, if you think about it, you're going to let loose some 50 or 100-pound flying beyond line of sight into the national airspace. You need some standards. You need to know it's not going to fall out of the sky. You need to know it's not going to drop control. You need to know it can avoid other airplanes. And so I really see that this next phase is going to, and there are standards committees of every stripe and flavor right now working feverishly on developing all different aspects of this, and I write about that occasionally. And, it's going to get technical, and it's going to get, there's an attorney who I like very much, Mark Dombroff at LeClaire Ryan, and he was with the FAA for years, and he's an aviation attorney. He said, if you want to know what drones are going to look like in 10 years, look at manned aviation today. You know, it's not necessarily, I mean, obviously, you know, we're not carrying passengers. So there are areas of, shall we say, stringency or complexity that can probably and hopefully be avoided. And I think what you're referring to is the self-certification thing, where the FAA, in conjunction with the community, agrees on certain standards, and then it's up to the manufacturer to certify that they comply with those standards, as opposed to having every single piece and part tested. That's the concept. Because, you know, if you look at it, there's, I think, of the 49,000 FAAers, 45 or 46,000 of them are involved in managing 5,000 flights a day.
Right.
Well, that's not going to scale to, you know, drone world. So there has to be other ways to do it. And I think Lance comes into that. And you had a question about UTM. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that was actually my next question is UTM, is that the keystone to organizing the unmanned aircraft world? Is UTM the keystone to organizing the unmanned aircraft world?
Well, it's certainly one of them. I mean, you know, the UTM concept has kind of changed. When PK, who's the sort of father of UTM at NASA, first came up with it, it was sort of like a next-gen idea, that there'd be this giant global pervasive system that everybody belonged to and that regulated and managed everything, which was a great dream, but, you know, the first question was who was going to pay for it. So what that has evolved in is into the concept of what are called federated private networks that communicate with each other. And you're sort of seeing a prototype of that, as best I can tell, with Lance, where, you know, you've got a dozen different service providers now who all provide different color maps, different functions together with it, but they all coordinate through a central database. And I think that UTM, you know, will be, so if you're, I don't know, Newport Beach PD, you may have your own UTM system, deconflict your airspace and to manage your operations, that talks to and knows where the other stuff that's going on is, but really operates independently. And so I think that, yeah, UTM is kind of the key to it, but it's important to think about it as a bunch of standalone systems that have some interaction and can be sort of custom tailored to suit the concept of operations, the ConOps or the missions that the particular user wants. And what that suggests to me is that bigger users will roll their own and stand up their own UTMs, and smaller users or more occasional users perhaps will buy those services through a Skyward or through an air map or somebody like that. So I think you're going to see a bunch of flavors. It's going to take a while to shake out, but you know, that seems to be the first step beyond whatever brain power you can put into the individual airplane or aircraft to keep it out of trouble. And you know, I think that the piece that's missing from a lot of this discussion is what's going to drive all the evolution of all this is business demand. So what is business going to want to do and pay money to do that's going to encourage the development of these things? You know, it's like if you look at K2, you guys found a niche, you went after the market, you understood their demands, you build a product that meets their demands that they're willing to pay for, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Product. Well, it's the same thing with concepts like UTM. I mean, Lance, you know, was a prototype, a private-public partnership that a bunch of people, led by Greg McNeil, brought to the FAA, and the FAA said, well, Christ, these authorizations and waivers are killing us, so sure, let's try it. And now, you know, it's going to become a business. Now, will there still be lots of people who want to be USS providers in a year, 2 years. It depends how much are people going to use it. And, you know, right now the growth rates are still very slow.
Right, yeah. And
so, you know, you got to balance those things. I mean, some of these undertakings are quite expensive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, on our end for sure. I mean, just in developing an aircraft, people see it and they just see, okay, here's this aircraft. It costs X amount of dollars, but they don't know the X amount of dollars that went into actually just developing that one aircraft.
Exactly.
And it's
the computer systems are no different, and the networks are no different, you know. And
right.
I mean, what's helpful here is that Verizon and AT&T are rolling out 5G. 5G is rolling out globally, in fact, and you know they're looking for traffic, and so that's spectrum is an issue, so that might help there. I mean, it just, you know, it really gets down to who's willing to pay money for what and when.
And once again, we are talking with Chris from DroneBusiness.center, the author of Dronin On. It's a great blog. Be sure to check it out. He puts it out weekly. Now, Chris, let's talk about more of a kind of a localized event to you out there in New Mexico. Would the in the news it came out that there was something. They were saying hundreds of drones. Now DJI has come out and said that it was something anywhere between 35 and 40 drones in the air. Would UTM have helped in that situation, or counter UAS, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, you know, so I've been talking with, you know, Adam at DJI, and I've been seeing the news locally, and it was a sensational headline, you know, 435 hits, or 457 or something. It was on the Albuquerque News, and, you know, a great number of those are duplicates, same bird many times, maybe same day, maybe different days, but same bird, and a lot of them never came into the TFR. So would UTM have helped? Well, what Adam told me was that they picked up a lot of birds that turned on and locked on and never launched, and he wondered, and of course would be happy to attribute that to the geofence warning coming up on the local guy's controller saying, don't go, this is a TFR. So that could have been part of it. I don't think UTM helps particularly. I mean, you know, the world is really divided, in my opinion, between the professional operator who pays attention to these things because it's his livelihood, and, you know, what they like to call the careless, the clueless, and the criminal. And the careless and the clueless are the people who own the vast majority of those drones out there. And, you know, who knows, they thought it would be fun to go up and fly around.
Right, and I mean, I think I even read in the article one operator was even flying a drone from his balloon. And
drones out there entirely.
That was something different? Okay. But yeah, like...
I heard that yet. That would be pretty interesting. I wondered about that because up here in Taos, where I used to live, there's 3 tour companies that do balloons every day, and I used to watch them and think about flying a drone up there with them. So, you know, I don't think UTM makes a difference to that. You know, UTM is going to work with people who are doing business. You know,
right.
What you're really talking about is there a better way to communicate TFRs? Is there, you know, what is the potential of geofencing beyond what we have now? Yeah, UTM, if you wanted to plot a path from one side of Albuquerque to the other, it would probably tell you can't fly through there, you have to go around.
Right.
That it would do.
Oh, okay. So, all right, well, I think we've definitely covered many spectrums of this House Reform 302 situation. And once again, we are talking with Chris from DroneBusiness.center, the author of Dronin On. It's a great blog. Be sure to check it out. He puts it out weekly.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed doing it, and good luck to you guys. Keep me posted.
Hey, no problem. And thanks again for doing the interview, and we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Ken.
All right, thanks.